On June 14, 1891, the small fishing village of Yvetot on the cliffs of Normandy awoke to an unsettling silence. The sea, usually restless, seemed unusually calm that morning, yet the air carried a strange density as if heavy with expectation. From the upper paths, fishermen noticed something peculiar about the building that had dominated the coast for the past 4 years, the Saint-Bernard Sanatorium. No smoke rose from its chimneys, the chapel bell did not ring, and none of the attendants or patients appeared in the gardens. At first, the villagers thought it was simply Sunday rest, but unease grew as the hours passed. At noon, the local priest, Father Morel, went up with 2 parishioners to check. They knocked at the gate, called out for the director, Dr. Armand Leroux, but received no answer. Only the sound of the waves breaking against the rocks returned to them. Finally, they forced the entrance. What they found inside would later be described in the archives of the gendarmerie as an inexplicable event. The large dining hall still held plates with unfinished meals. Beds in the dormitories were unmade, with the impression of bodies that seemed to have risen in haste. Journals of observation were opened on the desks. In the small chapel, candles continued to burn as if they had just been lit. But there was not a single living being. Doctors, nurses, attendants, and 42 patients had vanished, as if dissolved into thin air. The Saint-Bernard Sanatorium had been inaugurated in 1887, built on the ruins of an old medieval chapel that locals had long avoided. The place was known as the Rock of the Monks. Legends said that in the 17th century, during a violent storm, an entire brotherhood had walked chanting into the sea, never to be seen again. For generations, fishermen claimed to hear the toll of a bell beneath the waves. Yet none of that had deterred Dr. Leroux, a man of science, from choosing the site for his ambitious institution. Leroux had been a respected figure in Paris, a psychiatrist dedicated to the study of what at the time was called the madness of the possessed. He believed in the curative power of isolation, of fresh sea air, and of faith. His project was welcomed by some as progressive, though the more superstitious villagers murmured that he was tempting forces that ought not to be disturbed. From the start, strange stories circulated among the servants. They said that at night the patients whispered words in an unknown tongue, that they sang in unison without having agreed, and that some walked through the corridors as if guided by a voice that came from the earth itself. Nurse Madeline, in a letter to her sister, recounted, "It is not delirium, for they all repeat the same phrases. I hear them at dawn, pronouncing syllables that no book could contain." Father Morel also began to notice peculiarities during Mass in the small chapel. One day, when he intoned the Latin responses, the patients answered him with such precision and force that he felt they anticipated his words. When he tried to alter the liturgy, they nonetheless pronounced the correct verses, as if reading them directly from his mind. Disturbed, he mentioned it to Leroux, but the doctor dismissed it. "Suggestibility, Father, nothing more than mass hysteria."
In 1889, a Parisian photographer named Jules Carrière visited the sanatorium to document the facility. Several group portraits remain from that session, preserved in faded glass plates. In one of them, the patients appear seated in orderly rows, but a detail has obsessed researchers. While most look toward the left of the frame, one figure in the center turns in the opposite direction, gazing intently into an empty corner. Carrière noted in his diary, "No matter how many times I asked him, he never looked toward the camera, only toward the shadow." The summer of 1890 brought storms of unusual violence. One night in August, fishermen swore that lightning revealed a glow not only in the sky, but emanating from the windows of the sanatorium itself. At dawn, circular marks of ash appeared in the soil of the gardens, burned into the earth, though no fire had been reported. Dr. Leroux, visibly shaken, wrote to a colleague in Paris, "I begin to fear that what we face here transcends science. There is a rhythm in the storm, as if the sea itself followed their songs." His personal diary, discovered years later, revealed passages that were never intended for official reports. Among them, "They were here before us. I do not know if they are voices of the sick or echoes of something older. The stones remember, and at night they answer." Christmas of 1890 left another unsettling testimony. Nurse Madeline described how during midnight mass, the patients began to sing a deep chant, unfamiliar yet perfectly coordinated. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and Father Morel collapsed, unconscious, while the candles flickered violently. Madeline confessed, "For an instant, I felt as if we were no longer in the chapel, but beneath the sea, with pressure crushing our chests and a chorus surrounding us." The following year would bring the inexplicable silence. The official report of June 14, 1891, written by Captain Desmoulins of the Yvetot Gendarmerie, described the discovery with clinical precision, though between the lines one senses the weight of dread. The sanatorium was empty, yet everything inside remained frozen in time. The food on the plates had not spoiled. The clocks still ticked, though no one had wound them. In the chapel, the crucifix was blackened as if touched by fire, but the wood bore no trace of burning. "Nothing indicates flight or struggle," Desmoulins wrote. "It is as though they rose from the table and walked into the air, leaving behind the impression of their presence." Searches extended along the cliffs and into the villages nearby. Patrols combed the beaches, while divers descended into the coves. One diver reported glimpsing an underwater cavern, a black opening in the rock that seemed to pull him toward its depths. Terrified, he surfaced abruptly, refusing to return. His companions mocked him until days later another diver vanished without a trace in the same spot. The authorities attempted to close the matter quickly, blaming a collective escape or even mass suicide. But the villagers knew something else lingered in the building. Rumors spread of nocturnal chants still heard from the chapel weeks after the disappearance. One fisherman swore that he saw lights moving through the windows on a stormy night, long after the sanatorium had been abandoned. A young journalist from Rouen, Émile Garnier, entered the building clandestinely in late 1891. His notes, recovered in a notebook found years later in a Paris bookstore, tell of a night of terror. "The walls sweated water as if they breathed," he wrote. "In the chapel, I saw symbols scorched into the altar, spirals and crosses that did not resemble any Christian mark. From the basement rose a murmur like a choir singing from beneath the earth." Garnier fled before dawn and never published his account. In 1892, under pressure from the diocese, an exorcism was performed. 3 priests entered the chapel at dusk, accompanied by 2 gendarmes. The ritual was never officially recorded, but a letter from one of the priests survives. "The moment we began the prayers, the candles extinguished themselves. We heard a voice rising from the floor, not from above. My brothers trembled. I confess I felt my faith falter. It was not the voice of man, but of the abyss." The exorcism was abandoned before completion. The building stood empty for years, though its walls never ceased to attract the curious. In 1899, a group of young students broke in on a dare. They later told how they found the dining hall intact, with food still upon the plates, unspoiled for almost a decade. One of them fainted. Another swore he saw figures sitting at the table, vanishing when they struck a match. By 1901, the case drew attention abroad. A German investigator, Friedrich Adler, visited the archives in Paris and traveled to Normandy. His conclusion was chilling. This was not a hospital, but a gate, They did not disappear, they crossed. His report, filed in Berlin, was ignored by the authorities, but copies circulated among occult societies. Engineers inspecting the cliffs in 1907 discovered cavities beneath the rock, tunnels eaten by the sea that connected directly with the foundations of the sanatorium. Some swore they heard echoes when striking the walls, as if the void beneath were vast. One engineer noted in his journal, "The earth is hollow here, and it resounds like a chest when struck. I fear it is less geology than something else." In 1910, a circle of spiritualists organized a seance inside the abandoned chapel. The medium, a young woman named Claire Delaunay, fell into a trance and began to speak in a language none recognized. Witnesses described her voice as multiple, as though dozens spoke through her. She collapsed, and when revived, her eyes bled tears. She never practiced again. During the Great War, in 1914, the Army requisitioned the sanatorium as an observation post. Soldiers stationed there endured nights of panic. One corporal reported hearing commands in German whispered through the corridors, though his unit was alone. Another soldier deserted, claiming that faces looked at him from the walls themselves. The building was abandoned again within months. After the war, in 1919, the British researcher Thomas Whittemore came to Yavato. He spent 3 nights in the sanatorium, keeping a diary. On the second night, he wrote, "Disappearance. One fisherman swore that he saw lights moving through the windows on a stormy night, long after the sanatorium had been abandoned." A young journalist from Rouen, Émile Garnier, entered the building clandestinely in late 1891. His notes, recovered in a notebook found years later in a Paris bookstore, tell of a night of terror. "The walls sweated water as if they breathed," he wrote. "In the chapel, I saw symbols scorched into the altar, spirals and crosses that did not resemble any Christian mark. From the basement rose a murmur like a choir singing from beneath the earth." Garnier fled before dawn and never published his account. In 1892, under pressure from the diocese, an exorcism was performed. 3 priests entered the chapel at dusk, accompanied by 2 gendarmes. The ritual was never officially recorded, but a letter from one of the priests survives. "The moment we began the prayers, the candles extinguished themselves. We heard a voice rising from the floor, not from above. My brothers trembled. I confess I felt my faith falter. It was not the voice of man, but of the abyss. The exorcism was abandoned before completion." The building stood empty for years, though its walls never ceased to attract the curious. In 1899, a group of young students broke in on a dare. They later told how they found the dining hall intact, with food still upon the plates, unspoiled after almost a decade. One of them fainted. Another swore he saw figures sitting at the table, vanishing when they struck a match. By 1901, the case drew attention abroad. A German investigator, Friedrich Adler, visited the archives in Paris and traveled to Normandy. His conclusion was chilling. This was not a hospital, but a gate. They did not disappear, they crossed. His report, filed in Berlin, was ignored by the authorities, but copies circulated among occult societies. Engineers inspecting the cliffs in 1907 discovered cavities beneath the rock, tunnels eaten by the sea that connected directly with the foundations of the sanatorium. Some swore they heard echoes when striking the walls, as if the void beneath were vast. One engineer noted in his journal, "The earth is hollow here, and it resounds like a chest when struck. I fear it is less geology than something else." In 1910, a circle of Parisian spiritualists organized a seance inside the abandoned chapel. The medium, a young woman named Claire Delaunay, fell into a trance and began to speak in a language none recognized. Witnesses described her voice as multiple, as though dozens spoke through her. She collapsed, and when revived, her eyes bled tears. She never practiced again. During the Great War, in 1914, the Army requisitioned the sanatorium as an observation post. Soldiers stationed there endured nights of panic. One corporal reported hearing commands in German whispered through the corridors, though his unit was alone. Another soldier deserted, claiming that faces looked at him from the walls themselves. The building was abandoned again within months. After the war, in 1919, the British researcher Thomas Whittemore came to Yvetot. He spent 3 nights in the sanatorium, keeping a diary. On the second night, he wrote,
In 1930, the French Society for Parapsychological Studies dispatched a small team to Yvetot. They installed recording devices of the era, primitive phonographs and barographs to measure vibrations. Their leader, Professor Auguste Villard, reported nights of inexplicable results. One phonograph cylinder recorded a low hum, rhythmic like a distant chant, though no human voice was present. The barograph registered pulses at regular intervals, synchronized with the sea's tide. Villard declared, "We are not measuring spirits, but a resonance, as if this place were a vast instrument tuned to an unknown frequency." The team's work was abruptly halted when one of the assistants, a young man named Henri, vanished during a stormy night. His companions claimed he had gone into the basement corridors carrying a lantern, following the sound of water. They heard his steps echo, then silence. When they reached the corridor, the lantern lay on the floor, still burning. Henri was never found. The society withdrew, and the report was buried in their archives. Locals insisted that storms intensified the phenomena. "When the sea rises, the voices rise," said an old fisherman quoted in a 1934 article. "It is not the wind, it is prayer or lamentation. I cannot say which." His words reflect the ambiguity that shrouds every account. Were the sounds lamentations of the lost, or invocations of something waiting beneath? The events of 1936, the last great storm before the Second World War, sealed the legend. The storm battered the cliffs, tearing boats from their moorings. Amid the chaos, several villagers reported lights in the windows of the sanatorium, long dark and boarded. More disturbing was the testimony of those who entered afterward. The chapel floor bore fresh footprints, wet and bare, leading toward the basement door. The footprints ended at the threshold, not before, not beyond. The door, of heavy oak reinforced with iron, remained locked and sealed. An investigator sent from Rouen described it as the most unnerving scene of my career. His notes add, "The prints are human, but elongated, as if the feet had been pressed under weight. Each step left water, though it had not rained inside. They all converge toward the door. None return." From then on, the building was permanently sealed. The diocese ordered the chapel closed, the gendarmerie prohibited entry, and the windows were boarded. Yet that did not stop rumors. Soldiers stationed nearby during the early years of the Second World War claimed they saw flickering lights. Refugees passing along the coast swore they heard a bell tolling from within. Some historians believe that the legend of Saint-Bernard is a palimpsest of fears, medieval superstition, maritime tragedy, and modern hysteria. But others point to the consistency of the testimonies, spanning nearly 50 years, from priests and doctors to soldiers and peasants. How could so many, across generations, invent the same chants, the same lights, the same footprints? One document, hidden among parish archives, offers an unsettling perspective. Written in 1647 by Father Anselm, a monk of the old chapel, it describes a storm.
Passionate, emotional, faster pace, with intensity, which the brothers marched toward the sea. He writes, We did not walk of our will. The song carried us. It rose from the stone, from beneath, and our feet obeyed. The connection between the monks of the 17th century and the patients of the 19th is tenuous, yet the parallels are striking. Both disappeared during storms. Both were drawn by chants no one else could resist. Both left behind traces that defied explanation. After 1940, when war swept across Europe, the ruins of Saint Bernard passed into a deeper silence. German troops occupying the coast used the cliffs for observation, but they avoided the old building. A soldier's letter, intercepted after the war, confessed, "We hear voices inside, orders in German though none of our officers are there. I refuse to enter again." The military sealed the doors and posted guards, but even they were reluctant to stand watch at night. By the 1950s, the sanatorium had become a forbidden landmark. Local children told each other dares, touch the locked gate, throw a stone at the boarded windows, wait in silence for the sound of the bell. Few lasted more than minutes before fleeing. Travelers occasionally stopped to see the ruins, their curiosity piqued by guidebooks that described the mystery of Yvetot. Journalists continued to write sensational articles, mixing fact with invention. Some mentioned the photographs of 1889, others quoted fragments from Leroux's diary, but the mystery remained untouched. In 1963, a team of archaeologists studying medieval sites in Normandy requested permission to examine the foundations. Their report, never widely circulated, describes underground cavities beneath the cliff, carved not by erosion but by deliberate hand. These passages resemble crypts, yet their alignment is not Christian. They form spirals, descending toward the sea. I cannot determine their purpose. The project was canceled after 2 workers refused to return, claiming to hear chanting in the dark. The 20th century brought new theories. Some suggested mass hysteria. Others proposed poisonous gases seeping from the cliffs, inducing hallucinations. A few argued that the entire story had been exaggerated by folklore. But the official archives remained. Pages yellowed with age, stamped by the gendarmerie, bore the unmistakable notes of men who had nothing to gain from lies. "Do not enter alone," one annotation repeated. In 1977, a documentary crew attempted to film inside the ruins. They obtained special authorization, entering with cameras, lights, and recorders. The footage, however, was never aired in full. Fragments that survive show long corridors covered in moisture, a chapel altar scarred by unknown symbols, and sudden distortions in audio where no interference should have existed. One cameraman later confessed privately, "We all heard the same thing, though the microphones did not capture it, a chorus, deep and endless, coming from beneath the floor." Locals still tell of storms in which the sea glows faintly near the cliff. Some say it is phosphorescent plankton. Others whisper that the glow forms shapes like windows shining from the deep. On such nights, fishermen refuse to cast nets near Yvetot. "The catch is cursed," one old sailor said, "fish that look blind with marks on their skin like the spirals of the walls."
By the end of this century, the building itself was little more than a carcass. Walls crumbling, roof collapsed in places, ivy devouring the stone. Yet the legend did not fade. In fact, it reached new audiences as paranormal enthusiasts, writers, and filmmakers discovered the story. Forums on the early internet spread images of the ruins, claiming ghostly figures appeared in the windows. Urban explorers ventured inside, posting photographs of graffiti layered over the old walls. And among the graffiti, some claimed to find symbols identical to those drawn by the patients a century earlier.
The story continued into the 21st century, adapted into novels, discussed in podcasts, whispered in documentaries. Some dismissed it as myth, but others insisted the consistency of details could not be ignored. The chants, the lights, the footprints, all repeated across decades by witnesses with no connection to one another. In 2005, a group of researchers conducted a digital scan of the cliff. The results, published briefly online before being withdrawn, suggested hollow structures beneath the earth, aligned directly with the sanitarium's basement. Their shapes were geometric, spiraled, descending toward the sea. One researcher admitted anonymously, "It is not geology. It is architecture, but no record shows who built it." Even now, more than a century after the disappearance of 42 souls, the warning persists among locals: do not linger near the Rock of the Monks during a storm. Windows of nearby houses are shuttered, doors locked, radios turned loud to drown out the faint echo that sometimes rises from the coast. The echo of a bell, the murmur of a chorus, the sound of a door waiting to open. The legend of Saint-Bernard has never been solved nor silenced. To this day, the archives of the French gendarmerie keep a folder labeled simply "Incident Inexplicable." Its pages contain official statements, photographs, sketches of symbols copied from the walls, and testimonies written in trembling hands. No conclusion was ever reached. The last annotation, written in faded ink, reads only, "They are not gone." Visitors to Yevata in recent years continue to speak of strange impressions. Some describe the sense of being watched when approaching the ruined gate. Others insist they hear a vibration in the stone itself, as though the cliff carries a pulse. On certain nights when the tide strikes with force, the chapel windows, long shattered, are said to glow faintly for an instant. Mobile phones capture nothing, though witnesses swear they saw the light. Legends have a way of weaving into the identity of a place. In Yevata, the Rock of the Monks is both curse and fascination. Tourists arrive hoping to see ruins, to photograph the ivy-covered walls, to touch the cold iron of the sealed door. Few remain after dark. Fewer still dare approach when a storm brews. The locals, protective of their silence, neither confirm nor deny, but in their eyes lingers a knowledge too heavy for words. The question remains, what happened on June 14, 1891? Where did 42 souls vanish? Skeptics point to mass escape, hidden tunnels, or collective madness. Believers speak of possession, of ancient rituals revived unconsciously, of a gate,
Another realm beneath the sea. Between them lies the undeniable. No trace was ever found. Not a body, not a skeleton, not a single clue of where they went. Researchers combed archives across Europe, tracing fragments. The diary of Leroux, the photographs of Carrière, the testimony of Father Morel, the reports of gendarmes, the letters of soldiers. Together they form a mosaic of dread, consistent and insistent, always pointing to the same abyss beneath the cliffs, the abyss that calls through chants no one can translate. In 2017, a group of paranormal investigators spent a night near the ruins with modern equipment. Their recordings captured nothing unusual, except for one device left unattended in the chapel. Hours later, upon playback, it revealed a deep, resonant chant, sustained for several minutes, accompanied by what sounded like the toll of a bell. Experts who analyzed the audio insisted the frequencies were beyond the normal human range. The team disbanded soon afterward, refusing interviews. There are those who argue the truth is irrelevant. Whether supernatural or not, the disappearance left a wound in the memory of Normandy. It stands as a reminder of the fragility of reason when confronted with the unknown. The sanatorium is gone in ruins, but its silence is louder than any reconstruction. It demands attention. It resists oblivion. And so every generation returns to the same cliff, drawn by curiosity, fear, or fascination. They walk the path to the Rock of the Monks, stand before the gate, and listen. Sometimes, if the wind is right, they hear it, the echo of chants carried by the sea, a murmur that is neither storm nor surf. Perhaps the final truth will never be known. Perhaps the 42 are not lost, but transformed, absorbed into the resonance of the cliff, into the pulse of the earth, into a chorus that still sings beneath the waves. Perhaps they opened the door that Leroux feared. And if so, perhaps that door remains open. A final line, scribbled in the margin of one surviving document, offers no comfort. It continues.